Church360 Ledger. Today is the second of 3 webinars. We're covering transactions today, and then tomorrow we'll be covering reporting. So thank you for joining me. If you're here live, I appreciate you taking the time to join us live today, and look forward to interacting with you maybe during the Q&A section at the end of the webinar. And for those of you who are viewing this as a recording, I hope that you find it helpful and a benefit in watching this webinar, as we hope to give you some training. Let's go ahead and begin. First of all, a little bit about myself as the instructor. My name's Tim Burke. I'm a software support technician here at Concordia Technology Solutions. My contact information is displayed there on your screen, my email address, as well as my direct phone number. I do have a couple things that I want to note here at the beginning. All phones and microphones have been muted, so I can give the presentation from beginning to end without any interruptions. But I am interested in any questions that you may have during the webinar. So on your side of the interface, you should have a little control panel that has a questions section. You can click on the little triangle in front of the questions label, and that will expand the questions window. And you can type in any questions into that window and send it our way throughout the entire webinar. And then any of those questions or any questions that are asked, I will answer at the end of the class during our Q&A session. Now, helping me today as support is our manager of our department, Rod Kiles. He's the manager of Concordia Technology Solutions, the support department. His contact information is displayed there on your screen, his email as well as his phone number. Thank you, Rod, for helping. And then today, our class agenda. Let's go over what we plan to cover. First of all, we'll do an overview of the topics that we'll discuss today, and then we'll drop into a discussion time, possibly around 30 minutes of time, and then we'll break for a short intermission of 5 minutes. Then we'll come back from our break and drop back into the discussion period. At the end of that, then we'll have a short 5-question quiz that covers the material that we covered today. And then we'll look at any questions that have come through the questions window. All right, so the topics that we plan to cover today. First of all, we'll be talking about some transaction conventions, just some rules that apply across the board. And then we'll look at our debit versus credits table, try to bring some understanding of how debits and credits applied to transactions work. Then we'll talk about deposits. We'll talk about creating checks, as well as printing those checks if you choose to print them through our system. Then we'll talk about the payment transactions. That would be online transactions, payments through that means, transfers, as well as journal entries. So that's our plan of attack this morning. So let's go ahead and let's get started. So first of all, we want to talk about some conventions that are used throughout these transactions. The similarities between all the transactions are every transaction must have a date. So whether that is today's date or a future date later in the week or later in the month, or actually backdating something that may have happened a week or a couple weeks ago, every transaction must have a date selected. There's a pop-up calendar in the date field to help you choose a legitimate date. Every transaction has the option of including a descriptive memo. So as you create your transactions, if there is a little bit more information that you'd like to give in that memo field to help bring some clarification, every transaction will have that memo field available. Every transaction will have a minimum of 2 line items. So since Church360 Ledger uses fund accounting with dual entry bookkeeping, that means that every single account will belong to a book and every single transaction will have 2 lines, one being a debit and one being a credit. And these debits and credits on each transaction must balance on all transactions before you can save them. All right, let's then go ahead and take a look at our debits versus credits transaction chart. So the way that each transaction is built, and I'm going to use my highlighting pen here. So if we were to create a transaction and using this chart, that would be, let's say, a check. If we were writing a check, that's going to decrease our asset account, our bank account. So that would be the credit side of the transaction. And then since this is a check and we're making some type of payment, that's an expense. So the opposite side of the transaction, since every transaction must have a credit and debit, then we would be using a expense account, which would be the debit side. And that's actually, as you can see here on the chart, increasing that expense of that particular account throughout the year. As another example, let me go ahead and clear that. Let's say that we're working on a deposit from our offerings. As that deposit comes through, we're going to be increasing our bank account. So that's the debit side in this case that increases our asset. And then we need a credit on the opposite side of the transaction. And if offerings are coming in, that's an income type of account. It might be a general fund income account that you use. And that works out perfectly in this chart as well, because a credit then is increasing the income that you receive at the church. And so this table here, go ahead and clear. This table here then gives us that breakdown of every account type that's used and whether the debit or the credit is either increasing or decreasing that account. So here the asset, if we were going to write a credit to the account, that's going to decrease it. The same way with these restricted accounts. And a restricted account is money that is in our asset, our bank account, that's restricted for a specific purpose. If you by chance used our Shepherd Staff program in the past, you might be familiar with dedicated accounts. And this is similar, but it is applied differently here in Church360 Ledger. A restricted account then is considered to be an asset here in this account. And in most cases, it's a sub-account of your bank account, your main asset. And there's just a portion of that money that's restricted for a specific purpose. So if you have, let's say, a bank account with $50,000 in it and $1,000 of that is restricted for the organ repair, then you would have a sub-account of that bank account called organ repair, and it's considered then an asset as well. So the debits and credits are applied the same way as in the case of increasing and decreasing the amount, just as a regular asset would be. Any liabilities that you have, the credit increases the liability, the debit decreases that liability. As we talked about earlier, a credit to an income account increases the amount of that income. A debit to that income will decrease it. For expense, it's just switched around opposite from the income. A debit increases the expense and a credit will decrease it. And the note at the bottom is already what I've spoken about. The money in a restricted fund, this is the one with the asterisk up here, is held in Church360 Ledger as an asset account. All right, let's go ahead then and continue on, and we'll take a look at one of our first transaction types here, the deposits. So let's talk about deposits. Deposits allow users to deposit money into an asset account. This might be money that's come in from your membership through offerings or through other means. Examples of that, as I said, are offerings, rental income, etc. This particular transaction, the deposit, is limited to using an asset and an income account. For each of these transaction types, we try to guide you along and keep you from having to question, well, do I use a credit here or a debit? Because normally for a deposit, those are going to be in a way preset within our form. I'll show you that in a moment. And we like to limit then that to using an asset and an income account. Also, our deposit transaction here does integrate with our other Church360 product, which is Church360 members. So as you create offering batches in Church360 members, it will create a pending deposit here in Church360 Ledger. And I'll demonstrate that as well. Let's go ahead and jump over to our Church360 Ledger account. I'll go ahead and sign in. So this is the demo database that we'll be using today, Christ Community Church. And we're on the home page, which you can always reach just by clicking on the orange $sign here in the upper left corner. That will always get you to this home page or landing page on your account. We're talking about transactions. So that's making use of this new transactions button here on the right side of the Omnibar. I'll go ahead and click on the button. And we're talking about deposits first. So I'll click on deposits. And this is our deposit entry screen that we were just talking about. You can see that we limit the use on the left side of this deposit form to be an asset, and we limit the right side to be an income account. I'll go ahead and give you an example of putting one of these in. Let's go ahead and just call this a general fund deposit. I'm going to go ahead and use today's date, 30th of June. Not going to worry about any payee since we're talking about a deposit. I'll click in the asset field here. When you click your cursor in that field, you'll get a drop down of the accounts in your chart of accounts. And you can just begin typing, like I know that this is Central Trust. It happened to be there right at the top already, but you can just begin to type in the name of the account and your drop-down list will then be filtered for that search term. I do want this general deposit to be for the Central Trust checking account. The deposit, let's just say totals $500. The income account that we're be using today is just a general fund income account. So I type in general. You'll see above the account name in smaller print, a little path of where that account is located. So we see income / unrestricted income / offering / funds. These are just categories where this account is nested in. So I'll go ahead and click on the general fund income account. It knows that I put in the $500 on the left side here as my deposit into my bank account. So both of these sides, the debit and credits do balance as it shows here at the bottom of the screen. As I filled out the form at the top, the bottom of the screen is showing the representation of debits and credits. It shows that a debit has been applied of $500 to the general checking account at the bank. And the credit has been applied to the general fund income account. So I can go ahead and click save to save this transaction. It takes us back out to the main home screen. And at the moment I have May here on my my date selector in the upper right corner. Let's go ahead and change this to the whole year 2021. And so there is my transaction, my deposit to the bank. The memo reads general fund deposit for $500. Another example of a deposit, let's talk about that integration with Church360 members. I've got Church360 members already up on my other tab here in the browser. I'll go ahead and sign in to the Church360 members product. This is a little bit outside of, Church360 Ledger, but for those of you who are attending today that might have this product, or those of you who are viewing this recording of the webinar at a later date, I do want to show you the integration here. We're going to go to the offerings view in Church360 members, where I've got an offering batch already pre-created for May 16th. A lot of this on the screen is not important. I'm not going to explain it, but I did just want to show you that the microphone on. Okay, there we go. And sorry about that. And so this particular screen with the background that's shaded in like a salmon color, that shows the limits of the particular offering batch that was input. You can see a number of these offerings are all associated with different types of offering funds. I wanted to make sure I got a good group of funds represented in the offering batch. And so this is the batch that was input into Church360 members. Now let's go ahead back to Ledger. We'll be looking for a May 16th date. Once that batch is created, what will happen here in Church360 Ledger at the top is a pending transactions icon. And so we'll click on pending transactions. I've got a long list here that we haven't always kept cleaned up. I'll go ahead and just scroll down. What I'm looking for is an icon that will be a greenish color to represent Church360 members. We need to get to the first one here. Let's go a little bit farther than that one. Here we go. So here's May 16th. If I go back to Church360 members and actually go into the batch, we see the total here at the top for May 16th of $1,210. Going back to Ledger, that we can confirm that this is a $1,210 deposit for May 16th. It's got the members icon here, so I know that that comes from Church360 members integration. I can click on the button that reads deposit. And here is the deposit from the offering batch. And you'll notice that the integration of this offering batch does break out each of the offering funds here on the right side of the screen. You've got all of our income accounts here that the offerings were given to in that offering batch. And any that have not been associated with an income account yet would be in a condition like this last one, social concerns. So the first initial time you have an offering come through for an offering fund that has not been matched, it will be blank. I need to click in this income field to associate social concerns with an income account. And I don't believe, let's see, I'll use the search field. Oh yeah, here we have this income account that matches social concerns already in our chart of accounts. I'll click on that. You'll see then that it applies that particular income account in the cell. And now from this point forward, any offerings given to social concerns will automatically be linked to the social concerns income account, because I've just created that linkage right now as the first initial offering that came through. So this is showing all of our income accounts. On the left side is where I need to put our asset. I'm going to put all of this $1,210 into our unrestricted central trust checking. Now, in a deposit, you can use multiple assets. So if there was a portion of this that was to go into a different asset account, we could certainly click in that cell underneath it and choose an additional asset. But in this case, I'll just keep it with the general or the central trust checking account, our general fund there at the bank. And we'll say as an memo offering batch, maybe even just put May 16th. The date, every transaction must have a date, so I'm just confirming the date that I want to pick. It is a Sunday, July 16th, so that's the date that we also want to keep for our transaction. I can then scroll down. You'll see the Save button here, which I'll click in a moment. But again, at the bottom, we'll see the reference of the debits and credits and how they are associated with the different accounts that are used. And at the bottom, it does show the totals that do balance out. So this transaction is ready to be saved. Click Save. We get the confirmation at the top, the transaction was created. And let's see, we'll have to go back to, I think I used May 16th here. So here's the transaction, offering batch May 16th, my memo. It shows the $1,210. And this is from my home screen. Now, granted, you know that this is the transaction listed here. I can click on it here in the home view. And clicking on it will just bring up that same transaction once again. Where I could edit it, I do have other options here on the screen. Once it's been created, I can void it here on the left side. We'll show a void in a little bit. We can make an amendment to the memo. We could make this transaction reoccurring, but in this case, it might not be a good idea. We'll look at utility bills for something maybe for reoccurring. We could copy this transaction and make another transaction just like it, but put a different date on it and maybe tweak the amounts. And then we've got the Save button. So I'll just go ahead and close it because we've already saved it when we initially put that in. And so that is our deposit from Church360 members. Okay, so let's go back then to our PowerPoint and talk about our next transaction type, which will be checks. So I'm going to go back to the home screen here, and we'll be talking about checks here. All right, so some important things about checks. This allows users to print checks or record handwritten checks. So either method, we do have the ability to print checks on check forms right out of Church360 Ledger, as well as you can continue to do handwritten checks if you've got just a small number of checks, so you're a smaller church and you don't have as much activity. Checks are used for paying things like payroll and church bills. You're able to print laser and inkjet checks through the system. And if you are interested in printing checks through the system, we do have a particular check form that we use, and those checks can be purchased from a company called Print Revolution. It used to be Forms Plus. In the past, we've had a relationship with them for years, but now they've changed their name. So the URL or the web address for this company is www.printrevolution.co. It is .co there on the end. That's not a mistake. It is not .com. It is .co. I did want to point that out. So navigate there to their company if you'd like to see the check forms that are made specifically for Church360 Ledger. All right, let's go ahead and jump then back to our internet site here of Ledger, and we'll talk about transactions, bring up the check transactions. So here, couple of good examples are, like I said, writing payroll checks and also paying church bills. There are some restrictions to checks. The transaction types limit you to using either an asset or liability on the left side of the check form and an expense or liability here on the right side. The date field, a date is required. We'll continue to go with the 30th of June here. And let's look at an example here of let's do a payroll check first. So if you happen to be doing payroll, we get calls on this every once in a while. How to form a payroll check here in Church360 Ledger. We'll go ahead and do a payroll check for a person named Derek. We'll do Derek Woods. He's our virtual pastor in this demo database. In order to do a check, what we'll be doing here on the left side of the transaction is we'll be doing the net amount that's coming out of the bank, Central Trust checking. So that's going to be the $652.48. And then we'll also on the left side be showing the amounts for the liability accounts. So we need to find federal income tax. And for this payroll check, let's say it's going to be $95.10. And for the state, it's going to be cost $22. For Social Security. And all of these accounts are already in our chart of accounts. And then Medicare. So that takes care of the left side of the check. We'll now, as the gross amount, is apply that to our expense account. And so what we'll use there is a staff salary expense account, and that is the total of $33.33. So you'll see then in this check transaction that a representation of the check will show in the middle of the screen. Your bank account would be here in the upper left corner, but it does have Derek Woods. You're able to verify the address where this payroll check would be addressed to. The memo appears here in the lower left, and then the amount here on the right with it spelled out, as well as the date here in the upper right corner. And then at the bottom, it does show the debits and credits. So we see the $833.33 debit applied to the expense account. And then the credit portion is our net from the bank as well as the liability accounts. Excuse me. So if this was a payroll check that you do often and it just might need to be tweaked a little bit, you could make this reoccurring by clicking on that, button and then have this check end up in our pending transactions every 2 weeks, and we'd then be able to click on that pending transaction and tweak the amount for any particular 2-week period that comes up here in the future. I'll show that kind of process here in a little bit with one of our other transactions. I'll go ahead then. I think everything's in place. We'll click Save. And then you'll see here on our home screen, the way that this looks, it does have 5 lines to it. It has the bank as well as the liability accounts. Shows here on the left a little icon that shows that it is not printed yet. This is the memo that it's all payroll and the deductions from our bank account, and gives us the running balance. Let's show one other type of check besides a payroll. And we'll just do a check for, let's say, the gas bill. Also on June 30th, we've got a company here locally called Laclede Gas, and the amount of this gas bill is $94.87. Whoops, got to choose the bank account first. So we'll go with just the general unrestricted portion of our central trust checking, $94.87. And then our expense account is already set up for gas expense, $94.87. It shows us the representation of the check. We can confirm the address. Everything looks good. I'll go ahead and click save. All right, so we've created two checks. The Laclede gas bill is here at the top. And now we're ready to move on to our print queue. So the print queue is an icon here on the navigation bar at the top. Looks like a little printer. Got a number 13 here. That tells me that there's 13 checks that we could print. Clicking on that icon will then show the checks available here in date order, in ascending order. And so there's a accumulation of some checks here over a period of time, but the two that are here from June 30th are here at the bottom, the Laclede Gas Company and the payroll check for Derek Woods. Now you may have noticed I created these checks. I did not put a check number in the check itself yet. Let's go back to our home view real quick and look at the gas bill. So I did, if you notice, leave the check number field blank because the check number will get assigned to it during the print process. So let's go back to the print queue here. I want to go ahead and print both of these checks that we created, the gas bill, the payroll. I checked the box here of the two that I want to print. I can click the print button. That will take us through the print process of printing the checks from our system if we have those check forms from Print Revolution. Other than that, you can continue to handwrite checks. And then once you've handwritten them and sent them out, you can still use the same method of putting a check mark in the box and then just click the button mark as printed. I can show you that as well here in just a little bit, but I do want to go through the print process and what you can expect if you're using check forms to print your checks. We'll go ahead and click print here. It gives us a representation of the two checks. In this case, it's the middle format check where the check appears in the middle of the page of this portrait orientated check form page. Gives us a stub at the top. We can just verify our data. This is check number 1 to Laclede Gas. And then scrolling further down is the payroll check to Derek Woods, our virtual pastor, the stub at the top, the check in the middle, and then another stub at the bottom. So I can go ahead, if I agree with all of that information, I can click print. Let's go ahead and refresh the screen and click print once again. There we go. So then a confirmation dropdown appears, and it's giving the check numbers that it intends to use, check number 1 and check number 2. I can change the check numbers at this time if I need to. You can just type in that check number in there in the field if you need to. Other than that, after a check has been printed, then the next time you print checks, it will just continue on with check number 3 at that point. So whatever you've printed and accepted or posted as a check number last, it will continue on from there. So then I can confirm these checks, make sure that that's the right number I want to use, confirm it, and then the internet browser print option window appears. You'll see the same representation of the checks here on the screen. And we can choose a printer from the destination dropdown. And we can then go ahead and just click print. And as long as our check forms were loaded in the printer, then we would have a printed check. So I'll go ahead and click print in this case. It gets sent to our printer here locally, and then it returns us back to this print queue window with the same two checks still check marked. At this point in time, I would go to the printer, I would look at the two checks printed, make sure everything lines up, that the printing completed successfully, all of the amounts and everything line up on the check itself, that there wasn't a bend in the check form and I need to reprint it again. As long as they come out and they look good, I would leave these check marks here and then just click mark as printed. That would take them then off of this queue. If, for example, one of these checks did not print correctly and I needed to maybe reprint the Derek Woods check, I would remove the check mark. I would keep the check mark under the gas bill that did print correctly, and then just click mark as printed. One check will be removed from the print queue. I confirm that, and that check is gone. Now I can come back to Derek Woods, and I could then go through the print sequence again, double check that all that information is correct, use the print button at the top, make sure that it still said check number 2, and if the form that I was using now says 3 because 2 was wrinkled or didn't print correctly, I can still then change this to check number 3, confirm, and then you'll see the check in the preview window does now have check number 3 as well. And I can go ahead then and print that and make sure it prints correctly. And then once we came back to this window, I could then mark it as printed. But let's say now using this same check here, let's say I handwrite checks. You don't have the check forms, you don't want to spend the money on those. So you're just going to handwrite checks. You don't have a whole lot of them that come through on a monthly basis. So you can handwrite out your check from your check register, from your checkbook, from the bank. And then once that's been handwritten out and everything looks correctly, you check it off here in the print queue and you just click mark as printed. You skip the whole process of printing. You just directly go to mark as printed. We click that, we confirm that the handwritten check is done, and it will remove it from the check queue. We can then go back to our home view, and you can now see that both check number 1 and check number 3 do not have those icons here on the far left as are shown in this particular check further down, because now they have been printed. So that's the check print process. Let's go ahead at this point in time and take a quick break. It's 10:39, and we'll come back here then in about 5 minutes. Okay, we're back. And while we were in our break, Susan did ask a question that's a good question to look at. So I'll go ahead and address it now. In fact, Rod already answered Susan, but she asks, will a check reprint process mark the unacceptable check as void? And no, it doesn't. You would have to, that check would still need to be voided. The check itself, it wasn't posted to the ledger yet. And so it was still in its preliminary state. In fact, let me go ahead and bring our view on screen again. The check was still in a preliminary state and not printed. And so, you know, there wasn't really the need. We could have still used the same check number 2. But in the case of you've got forms that are pre-numbered, I can see that. So what you might need to do then is void that check, that first check yourself. And I'll show you how to void a transaction here in a bit. And then just create a copy of that check number 2. And the copy will just carry over the same information. So let's say here in check number 3, we'd be able just to click the copy button. It would open up the exact same information in a new check entry window. We could then click save. It would create that new transaction and we can go right from there. And you can see the void option over here on the left, the button. And so that's where you would then manually void a transaction if you needed to do that. All right, so let's continue on here. We want to pick up now in our PowerPoint under payments. So let's get that on screen here. All right, so talking about the payment transaction. Payments allow users to record online or electronic transactions. So anything that you're going to do online, if it's paying a utility bill or ordering something from Amazon or making some other type of payment, EFT, you would do that with the payment transaction. This transaction does limit you to using an asset, a liability, and an expense account types, once again, just like the check. And examples again of this would be EFTs for utility bills, payments for bank fees, etc. So let's go ahead and take a look at one of these examples here. Back on our home screen, I'll go ahead and click the payment. So this is set up real similar just to the check option. In fact, you know, here we've already chosen the payment option from that button, but once you get into a transaction, you can still change it to one of the different 5 types of transactions right here in the drop-down. We'll continue on with payment. I'll give you an example of an electronic payment for an electric bill. We'll go ahead and use June 30th as the date. The payee is Ameren Electric. And I'm just kind of tabbing to each of these fields. You can use keyboard entry as well as using the mouse to put your cursor where you need to. So in this case, this is again, once again, from the unrestricted checking. Tab over to the amount field, and this is a electric bill for $145.35. And we'll use an expense account here for the electric bill. $145.35 is listed here on the right automatically. Again, pulls that amount from the left side. We see that the credits and debits here at the bottom do balance. So we could save this payment. And let's go ahead and do that at the moment. So here's our Ameren Electric payment. You'll see here in the account type column that it shows payment, where the other transactions we've created already have check listed there, as well as deposit for the very first one that we did today. We could then also click into this payment option, and let's go ahead and just make this electric bill reoccurring, and I'll show you where that takes us here. It opens and expands this little section, and let's say that the electric bill is paid maybe on the first of every month. So we could say this occurs every single month on the first day. You have the choice of pulling any of the days of the week as well as a specific day of the month. So here you've got a choice of 1 through 31 or 30. We've also got an option here just for the last day of the month. Maybe you like to create this check for your electric bill on the last day of the month, no matter if it's the 30th or 31st, so you would take that option. And this one I might want to reoccur on the first day of every month, so we could then click save, and the recurring transaction has been created. That recurring transaction we could then review and confirm by going to settings, and under settings there is an option here for recurring transactions. I know that there's a big list here of different recurring transactions we've created over time, but this was for Ameren Electric that we created for the first day of the month. Let me go ahead and just make sure that everything's there. Yeah. All right, and well, let's see. It doesn't appear actually that it's here because this was for 145.35. Here we go. This is my transaction that I just created, the recurring one, electric bill payment 145.35, the first of every month. And then that means the first day of every month, tomorrow, I would then have a new pending transaction for the electric bill for a payment of 145.35. Any payment that shows up here in the pending transactions, let's just use one of these other payments here at the top for this gas bill for June 27th. You are able to click on that pending transaction, and then you can edit it. Let's say that maybe the gas bill wasn't 175 for the month of June, and so we could say that it was actually 178.57. You'll see then that the balance is listed here underneath the 175, but we can go ahead and change that to 178.57 as well. And now this pending transaction, if that has all been tweaked the way we need it, that we can change the date if we needed to, and then we can save this pending transaction with the changes. We'll go ahead to our home screen, go back to the 27th, and here is the pending transaction. It was set up as a recurring transaction, and then we can tweak it and then post it here to the ledger. So I did want to make you aware that the pending transaction can be reviewed and then edited and changed before you save it. And then once it's saved, then it's ready to go. All right, let's take a look at our next transaction type. Transfers. So transfers, they're used to represent electronic transfers between banks and to make line item corrections. It only allows moving money between similar account types. So if you're going to be transferring money out of an asset, it's got to go to an asset. If you're going to be transferring money out of an income account or expense account, then it must transfer to that like income account or that like expense account. So you will need to use the same account type when you're doing a transfer. Let's go ahead then and take a look at a transfer. Click on New Transactions, click Transfer. You'll see here in this particular form, there's a memo field again and a date field, so we can create and input any information there that we need. But you will see here at first that it does show that really all 4 account types can be used: asset, expense, income, or liability on the left side, as well as asset, expense, income, or liability on the right side. But once I choose one of those, let's say I want to transfer money from our checking to our savings. So I select the checking account. Once I've selected that asset, now the right side also has asset, because I'm using the transfer function, but it does have to use the same account type for transfer. So we can make this $500. We can then go over here to the other asset. I can type in Central Trust, and we want to transfer $500 over to savings. That looks good. The debits and credits balance. We can go ahead and save this. Back on our home screen, then it is showing this particular transfer transaction in 2 lines on the ledger, one for the checking account, taking the money out of it, and then one for the savings account, showing the money going in there. So keep that in mind. Then for transfers, so in case that you did, let's just say for a transfer, just to show this, if you were using, let's say, an income account and you had accidentally applied some income to the wrong account, let's just say the general fund. Here's our general fund income. So as soon as I've selected that income, you'll notice then the right side also says income. So right away, the drop down, once I click in the cell, it will limit you to just seeing income accounts. Then in the drop down, you can scroll through the list and say, oh, okay, this income didn't come through the general fund. It came through actually the Vacation Bible School as income. And so you could then create that transfer from one income to another income. Again, that works also for one expense to another expense, or one liability to another liability. So that's our transfer. All right, let's go back to our PowerPoint and look at the next account type. Journal entries. This is our last account type. This allows users to record account balance corrections, such as interest earned or bank fees. You can utilize all 4 account types in this particular transaction. So this is kind of open-ended. And we can jump right into our account here, go to journal entry. And let's say we'll just do a journal entry for bank interest. Today's date, we just need to choose the unrestricted checking. And let's say that we received $5.40 in bank interest. So if you remember from our transaction chart earlier, a debit will increase the bank account. So if it's interest, we want to increase it by $5.40. And then on line 2, what we'll do is we'll look for a interest account, income account that we already have set up in our chart of accounts. And that would be then the credit. So the journal entry, we're just adjusting for bank interest. Let me go quickly back to our chart here. Bank interest, what we're doing here is we're debiting the asset account. So we're increasing that with the $5.40. And then we're using a credit on the other side of the transaction for an income account, which also increases that bank interest income account. So this is the way that the transaction then would look between increases and decreases. It's increasing both the asset as well as the income account in that case. All right, so in the case of, let's go back to our transaction. In the case of like bank fees, if there was a bank fee that we were doing, and let's go ahead and remove these amounts. Let's say a bank fee, we would want to decrease our assets. So we might put a 540 there. And then instead of an income account here, we'd be looking for, let's see, I don't know if we have it yet. We do have bank fees expense account here. And we would do the 540 there, both debits and credits balance. We can go ahead and click save. And then you'll see that a journal entry is done. That's the account type. Shows the memo of bank fees of $5.40. So depending on if you're wanting to increase or decrease your bank account with the particular correction or adjustment, you'll need to decide through the debits and credits which one to use. All right, so let's then talk about voiding a transaction. This will be our final, and then we'll jump into the quiz real quick. So let's see, let's go back to our voiding transactions. All right, this will cancel the effect of a transaction. It creates a hidden reversing transaction and groups the two transactions together. So that's what's kind of happening behind the scenes when you click the void button. And you do need to note that this cannot be undone. Once you've voided it, then that's permanently applied. If you made a mistake, you would be able to use the copy function to make a copy of that voided transaction and then just tweak it as you need. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at that. Let's just use the journal entry that we just created. I'm going to click on the journal entry correction that we made for bank fees, and I want to void that. So when I click void, it will then ask you to confirm the void, just in case you accidentally were moving your mouse across the screen and happened to click the mouse button at the time you hit void. And this was just a way of saving yourself from an accidental click. We can confirm the void, and you'll see now that that journal entry no longer appears on the home screen. In the background, a reversing journal entry was made, and it is off the screen. But there is an audit trail for those transactions that you do void, and that is through the general ledger report. This will be covered more reporting tomorrow in tomorrow's webinar. But if we went to the general ledger report, you'll notice here at the top of the screen, we've got the full 2021 year and the date range in the upper right corner. Every void that you do will then appear with a pink background in the general ledger. So this is showing that the voided transaction here. If we clicked on it, it would take us to that voided transaction, voided here in the lower left, and that, remember, cannot be undone at this point. And as well, with it cannot being undone, the transactions that you void are only those that have not been cleared yet. So if we go back to our our home page here, and I would happen to scroll down, I think I've got some transactions here that have been cleared. These have been reconciled. They have a little padlock. I would not be able to void any of these because they have been cleared. And also if I went to a prior fiscal year, where right now the fiscal year that's open in this is 2021, but let's say I went to 2020 and looked at some transactions from a historical standpoint. This fiscal year of 2020 is not open, so I would not be able to void any of these transactions. I could click on a transaction and review it, but there is no void button. So in order to void a transaction, it does need to still be open, not cleared yet, and it does need to be in the current fiscal year or the fiscal years that you have open. All right, very good. Let's go on to our quiz. All right, our 5-question quiz. The first quiz question is a true or false. A pending deposit from Church360 members, like I showed you earlier with the offering batch coming over, will break out the fund totals on individual lines on the income side of the transaction. Go ahead and get the poll launched here for you. So on the screen, you have a true and a false option. Go ahead and just click on the appropriate answer of what you believe it is. A pending deposit from Church360 members will break out the fund totals on individual lines on the income side of the transaction. Go ahead and just go with your gut. I don't know who's selected true, who's selected false, so don't worry about being wrong if you don't know the answer. We're just using this as a way to see if the information has been communicated during the webinar. All right, very good. Anyone else? Go ahead and click last call. All right, very good. I'll close it. And we'll share the results here. So 80% of you said true, 20% said false. The answer here is true. So when entering a pending deposit from Church360 members and Church360 Ledger, the offerings given will be split out into the funds that they were given to, into the offering funds they were given to in Church360 members. And after you've selected which accounts these funds match up with, the next time you enter a pending deposit, the system will remember the account selection for these funds. In other words, once you've made that link between, like we use social concerns in our example, and we linked it to the social concerns income account in Church360 Ledger, once that link is established, then from this day forward, it will always already be linked for us, and we won't have to make that link again. All right, very good. Let's go on to the next question. This one again is a true or false. Handwritten checks will not appear in the print queue along with the checks to be printed. Is that true or false? Handwritten checks will not appear in the print queue along with checks to be printed. Go ahead and make your selection. All right, any last minute selections made here? Go ahead and click on your choice. I'm going to close the poll. All right, so 100% of you said false on this one. And the answer is false. So you were correct. All checks are sent to the print queue. To remove a handwritten check from the print queue, just check the box to the left of the check and click the marked as printed button. So either way you use our system, whether with check forms and you print them through the system, or you just handwrite your checks, You can then remove that check from the print queue just by clicking the Mark as Printed button. All right, the next question, true or false? You cannot review a pending transaction before it's posted, and you'll need to edit the transaction after it's been posted to make any changes. You cannot review a pending transaction before it's posted, and you'll need to edit the transaction after it has been posted. Is that true or false? All right, it looks like we've got most people clicking on their answer there. Let's go ahead, share the results. 80% and 80-20 split. 80% said false, 20% said true. The answer is false. Whenever you post a pending transaction, before you can post it, you'll see the transaction, a preview of the transaction that will be created, and you will have the opportunity to make any needed changes before posting. So the example I had used was a reoccurring utility bill that shows up in the pending transaction on a particular day of the month, and you can then click on that pending transaction. It will show you a preview of the transaction before it gets posted. You can then make any tweaks, change the amount if you need to, change the date if you need to, and then save it, and it will save it then with those changes. So that is correct. The answer is false. Next question, true or false? When creating a journal entry, applying a credit to a bank account will decrease the account balance. Is that true or false? When creating a journal entry, applying a credit to the bank account will decrease the account balance. And if I showed you our debits and credits increase and decreasing chart, I would give the answer away. So this is all just kind of working on your memory here. All right, it looks like most of you have voted. Let's go ahead and close the polls and share the results. So 100% of you said true. The answer is, it is true. A credit to an asset will decrease the account balance, while a debit will increase the account balance of an asset. All right, very good. Let's see. Next question, the last one, true or false? You can void any transaction regardless of its status or what year the transaction was written for. We covered this at the very end, so I'm hoping that you all get this correct. You can void any transaction regardless of the status or what year the transaction was written for. Let's go ahead and get another minute for people to answer. Last quiz question. All right, looks like everyone has voted. So 100% of you said false. Let's go ahead and share. The answer is false. That is correct. Transactions can only be voided if they have not been marked as cleared during a reconciliation, and if the transaction is within an unlocked fiscal year. All right, very good. Thank you for joining me with that quiz. Now it's time for the Q&A. Do you have any questions? You can type those into the questions window if there are any further questions. If not, I know a lot of you are wanting to get going, so I appreciate your time today. If you've tuned in live, thank you for joining me. And you still have time to put in any questions that you might have if you're with me live today. If not, and you're watching this recording, thank you for watching. I hope that this video was beneficial and you were able to pick up some new things and most of your questions answered. If not, go ahead. If your questions weren't answered, go ahead and reach out to us. I put our 800 number on the display there, as well as the email to our support department. So you can reach out to us via phone or via email, and we'd be glad to assist you with and answer any questions that you have. But thank you for attending today's 360 Ledger webinar. It doesn't appear that there are any further questions that have come through. So hopefully I've done a thorough job of covering transactions for you today. We hope you enjoyed it. Today's session, please attend tomorrow's if you're interested in the reporting area of Church360 Ledger, and have a great day.